working folk don't have a chance unless we organise. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on?
Hey, Jenna. I watched Jenna in her social media world the other night. It was very interesting. She was live blogging from the Ernie Awards. Live tweeting. Live tweeting. See, I got it wrong too. There I was trying to find your tag and a handle. So I'm an amateur user of Twitter, but I'm trying. And several others to acknowledge who was there, but also to let someone who wanted to know what was happening aware of, a prize winner. And as I was sort of sitting there and searching and looking and trying to type things and then realised, oh my God, I've gone way over the actual character limit. I learned the whole time Jenna's tweets were actually just popping up every few seconds. It's quite incredible.
Well, last night in my other favourite thing, which is rugby league, I'm a bit of a football nut, and the Bunnies won, which was very... Are there any other Bunnies fans in this room?
Oh, yeah.
I did 73 tweets in 80 minutes.
Sorry, what was that, Jenna?
I did 73 tweets in 80 minutes instead of my brother was watching me tweet. I was live tweeting the game from the comfort of my sofa in my lucky undies and my red and green.
Well, we look forward to hearing more about your world and your lucky undies. So, Jenna, we welcome Jenna today. Thank you for being with us. Jenna's a UTS academic, for those who weren't aware, and a columnist for the Canberra Times, and one of the co-creators of the fabulous and absolutely huge feminist action group Destroy the Joint.
And Elle was there at the beginning.
And Elle was at the beginning.
Myself, I was clapping Elle.
Yeah, sure. I actually could have a whole page listing the whole variety of various interests that you have and where you have written, but we'll leave that for you to talk about. So please welcome Jenna Price.
So my name's Jenna Price, and in 1979 I started at the University of Technology Sydney, which was then called the New South Wales Institute of Technology, and I really want to thank them for teaching me, and the lovely Ron Fuller, who's here in the second row, and John Kapner, who's in the back row, because having a free education was a wonderful and liberating thing for me, and I really hope that the governments that we have in this country will eventually bring back. Talk a little bit about how I got to be a journalist first, because it's really I'm blaming it on John, who's in the back, because when I said I wanted to be a teacher, he said, "You're too much of a sticky beak to be a teacher." And it turns out that I'm back at teaching now, and you can still be a sticky beak, and the combination of being a teacher and a journalist really suits my personality. I've never done any unpaid work as a journalist. The whole time that I've been reporting since 1979, when I started on the student newspaper and was paid very badly, I've been paid for the work that I do. Sometimes I'm not paid very well, and sometimes I'm not very good and I don't deserve to be paid very well, but I do my very best that when people are paying me, I will do the best kind of journalism I can. In 1982, I started as a cadet at the Sydney Morning Herald. For a long time, the Sydney Morning Herald didn't take cadets. That was the best way of training people. They didn't do it. They're back doing it again now, and I think it's their third year of having quite a big intake. And I'm proud to say that there are quite a few UTS students who get into those intakes. I would say that I have always been really interested in social. When I started at the Herald, my dream was to write a column. Not because I wanted to tell people what I thought, but of course I did. But the other reason is that when you write your opinions, people write back. And I've always really loved that about being a public opinion person, because you have a dialogue. Sometimes the dialogue is completely insane. For the last 12 years I've been writing about feminism, or what we used to call women's issues, and Some people are wildly supportive. We have a lot of, for instance, destroyers in the Blue Mountains, and we get a lot of conversation around feminism in a very positive way. But when I write about feminism in the mainstream media, there's a lot of crazy people there who want to chop my head off. And you know, they don't belong to Islamic State. So I have no idea why they think this is an okay thing to talk about to another person. So I decided that I was going to try and make the Sydney Morning Herald as social as I could before I understood that what social was. So I started a column on the agenda page called the Relations column. And this was really what we could locate as the first piece in the Sydney Morning Herald of user-generated content, apart from the letters pages. That was a place where people wrote their own stories and then people replied to those stories. So it was a conversation that went for quite a long time, and some of those stories still really resonate with me, and they resonate with other people who say, were you the woman who started the Relations column? And I go, yes, and they go, that was the first bit of open blogging. So it was a very powerful time for me to recognise that the audience was interested in participating, and that is the thing that I think is best about journalism now, that the audience, the users, are really pro-users, and that is what a Queensland academic called Axel Bruns calls those people who are both consuming and using and making the media. You are pro-users, and we are all this together. I would say that it is the thing that makes journalism different now. It's the ability to take in, to suck in a lot of the user-generated content and to publish it as if it's written by journalists. And that is where we have our flaws as well, that there are quite a few things that are written by ordinary people who are not journalists and who don't have training, and we have quite a few errors creeping into the kind of material. And I say this, and I've been saying to myself, oh, it's because they're not journalists, but this week, I know that all of you will have seen some of the most egregious errors appearing in all the papers. Both Fairfax, shockingly, defaming some young man as a terrorist, and of course News Limited, shockingly, assuming and I would say nearly inventing some of the stories they have about plots against Abbott Jihad, which I'm sure you will have all read. I'm looking at my phone partly because of the score, but partly because that's also where my notes are. So social has changed quite a few things around being a journalist. We get a lot more talk back, and we get to talk a lot more too. So you are able to talk to journalists and say, this is what I thought about your journalism, but also journalists are able to speak back in a way that we were never able to do before. I remember I was letters editor of the Sydney Morning Herald for about 3 or 4 months, and I discovered that Hawks up by 20 quarter time, if anyone's interested. I remember that we were not encouraged to write back to people who wrote us letters, so that's changed a lot now. If someone writes a letter complaining about my work or tweets complaining about my work, I get to speak back, and I find that a very rewarding dialogue because I often learn more. I've written a lot about things like reproductive rights in my life, and I've also gotten a lot of things wrong about reproductive rights in my life. So I find out much more from the audience than from the experts in some cases. At the same time, I discovered that a lot of journalists my age and a lot of younger journalists are very resistant to social, and I think Elle alluded to that before. Certainly people my age go, Twitter is a waste of time, Facebook is a waste of time, it's taking me away from my serious work. And these are people who are food critics. And I'm wondering how they consider themselves to be doing serious work. I mean, not that I don't love eating, but you know, surely those people can learn to tweet and use Facebook. The reason I think it's important is because it brings you in contact with people you would not normally come into contact with. It also allows you to promote your work, because one of the things that happens in the mainstream media, particularly in the very big organisations, is that the people they promote are men. And we've done some analysis on this in New Matilda, which was also republished on Wendy Bacon's own blog, that the people who are publicised, the people who are the front runners, are all men. And there will often be a photo of a radio station where every single person in their photograph is men, even though there are women on the roster. And it's the same is true of the main bylines in publications. So on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, it's mostly men, even though I know in the newsroom it's about half and half. Of course, that means that when it comes to bargaining for pay, this has a direct impact on our pay. So we are corresponding with people we don't see more often. We are able to do our work more quickly, and this also has challenges, because when you do your work quickly, you make mistakes, and that is what happened this week. A lot of people were under a lot of pressure to produce a lot of stories in a very small amount of time, and as a result there were errors. Now, there was the huge error of the mistaken photo, but I wrote something myself about the Ernies this week that appeared in Daily Life. The next day, in the print version, the Sydney Morning Herald published a story about the Ernies with last year's results. And I mean, I was not the first one to point it out, how hilarious was this that they were using a year-old copy, but then a lot of other people were tweeting about it. And I thought, this is an outcome of people who are having to do a lot of things in a very short time. And those wonderful people, and maybe you don't know this, but two of the best subs in Australia live in the mountains, Max and Judy Prisk. They live at Blacksland. Those people and people like them no longer work at the Sydney Morning Herald. And I wrote actually a private tweet to a senior person at the Herald saying, you need, where are your subs? I miss your subs. I personally miss your subs because, you know, I make a fool of myself almost every week, and those people used to save my ass daily. Yeah. So social has also changed the business model. I have found that there are some organisations now which pay for hits, so they give you a bonus for the number of times your Facebook, your stories are shared on Facebook or your stories are retweeted on Twitter. And that is mainstream news organisations, so it's not just some quaint little thing that's just been started. I think that, I actually think that's quite good. It's good to be having some kind of performance element in what journalism does, because I think a lot of what happened before was older journalists continued to do the kind of work they did with absolutely no examination of what interested the audience. And the audience, I have to tell you, is not just interested in cat gifs or dog gifs. They're really not. It was interesting to me that the most shared story I've ever written was one about the way in which Scott Morrison treated Gillian Triggs at the... that had 12,000 Facebook shares. I've never had anything like it in my life. So when people say to me the audience is only interested in, you know, Kanye West and Beyonce, and that's just not true. You are, I mean, you know yourselves what you're interested in reading, and it's not just about pop stars. Young people are interested in reading about pop stars, and, you know, I swear to God, most of you won't know this band, but when I was a girl, all I wanted to read about was the Monkees, and when I grew up a bit, I wanted to read about the Masters Apprentices. But I've moved on from then. I now want to read about the disability insurance scheme. I want to read about reproductive rights, and I think it's important to honour the audience for having much more interest and credibility and nous than we give the audience credit for. I want to say, though, that one of the most important things and challenges that are happening for journalists right now, and I know I've got 1 minute left, is that because of speed, we often make a lot of errors. And that's not just about social, but it's impacted by social, because we can see what our rivals are doing every minute of the day. I know when I was tweeting the Ernies, I knew that there was a person in the room from the Daily Mail and there was someone else in the room from the Telegraph, and I was going to be buggered if those people were going to beat me to getting stories out. So at that time I was kind of, you know, trying to copy and paste correct spelling of names, because although I'm quite a good speller naturally, it's not kind of in my head that I'm always going to remember that Christopher Pine is spelt with a Y. So I'd like to finish up by reading you something that the absolutely fabulous Catherine Murphy wrote this week for The Guardian. And she says here, and she is talking about the kinds of mistakes that everyone made this week, talking about the errors in both News Limited and in Fairfax. And I'm just going to try and find this bit, which I have of course lost, even though I had it neatly there a moment ago. So let's stand still for a moment and put these two events together. Our appalling collective performance this week and the profound lack of public support for our institutional role. I don't think we can avoid the reality that these two eventualities are connected. That's a harsh truth sitting before journalists and their employers this weekend, and it's this. People, the audience, don't support us very much, especially when we need our community mandate, because too often we fail our readers and viewers and listeners. We often hurl some very hard truths at others. In fact, we pride ourselves on it. It's about time we join the dots in order to hurl a few back at ourselves. And that's what I really think about journalism, that we need to listen to our critics and act on those criticisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. That was fantastic. I hope that generates a lot of questions and discussion afterwards.